Right, we've been trying to figure out who's the best All-Ireland winner from the last 16 seasons from the Football Championship. Plenty of Dublin in there, plenty of Kerry in there. We're now at the 7th fixture. So for anyone who hasn't been watching so far, effectively what we've been doing is we made the draw. You can see it there. The first fixture, for example, was 2005 Tyrone against 2018 Dublin, so on and so forth. We're now down to the 7th of the last 16 fixtures, which is 2007 Kerry against 2015 Dublin. So the winners all go through to the quarter-final, and then, it's knockout competition as you'd expect. And it goes down to a vote, so you can vote on ourgame.ie underneath the video. So, Michael Burney, we've been looking at this 2007 Kerry, back-to-back Kerry, the first team to do a back-to-back since Cork had done it in 1990. This was a team managed by Pat O'Shea. So they were up against Cork, though, a team that they routinely beat in Croke Park, even if they were losing to them in Munster.
Yeah, they seem to always have the hoodoo over Cork anytime they played in Croke Park. On this occasion in 2007, they actually beat them in Munster, which they hadn't on some other occasions. An interesting one, like Pat O'Shea taking over, you'd always kind of think, you're taking over All Ireland winners, obviously, when Jack O'Shea left. But Pat O'Shea and Jim Gavin have that same thing in common. It's a fairly unique thing, I suppose, for a manager to win an All-Ireland in your first year. So Pat O'Shea did it in 7 and Jim Gavin did it in 13, which is that's a fair achievement in itself now. And just comparing I suppose 2007 seems kind of like a long time ago, and you really need to jog the memory. But it wasn't exactly an easy passage that Kerry had through. Well, definitely not in the scoreline wise. And Dublin had it was fairly heavy weather by the end of it too as well. So two kind of interesting paths, and it'll be an interesting one to debate.
Yeah, I'll just put up the Kerry team on the screen. As Terrace Talk have the team up and in a nice little formation for us there. So in goals, Diarmuid Murphy, who of course would play in the 2015 final against that Dublin team. Sorry, he played in 2007, but he was a selector in 2015. So he's in goals. Pádraig Reedy, Tom O'Sullivan, Mark O'Shea in the full back line. Tomás O'Shea, Aidan O'Mahony and Killian Young. Then Dara O'Shea and Seamus Scanlon. Paul Galvin, Declan Sullivan and Owen Brosnan. Colin Cooper, Kieran Donaghy and Brian Sheehan, and the subs used were Sean O'Sullivan, Darren O'Sullivan, Tommy Griffin, Mike Frank Russell and Mossy Lyons. So you couldn't exactly say there are too many weaknesses there. If you were going to pick holes there, you'd probably say the defence is a little bit light, but there's some amount of talent in attack.
Yeah, and we talked about it off air, like that half hour line is savage. Galvin in his pomp, Declan O'Sullivan, who we'll go into in greater detail, in his pomp as well. And Owen Brosnan, who's an absolute powerhouse carrying ball through there as well. The Diarmuid Murphy link is interesting. I always, to be honest with you, like several goalkeepers came and went. I always thought he was the best kind of goalkeeper Kerry have produced in the last even 20 to 25 years. Probably him and Declan O'Keefe up there as the best two goalies, but I thought he was absolutely outstanding. And they were like Brian Murphy and Brendan Keeley came in not long after, but they struggled to replace him, and I think it's only now with Shane Ryan that they have what looks like a long-term replacement to him.
Like if you were to go through the path that Cork or that Kerry team had that year, they beat the snot out of Waterford 215 to 4 points. Then they beat Cork, like you said, 115 to 113 in Munster. Narrowly beat Monaghan, and this wasn't the Monaghan team that went on to be, typical Division 1 team and always kind of challenging for Ulster titles and being able to put it up to the best sides. They beat them 112 to 111, and that was definitely...
Just on that one, Shane, there was a word from the late great Wishy Fogarty. Their website, the Terrace Talk website, is class because you can just go back through and find out so much about the games. And there's a match preview and review. And just in the review of the Monaghan game, he said, "Why were we lucky to win last Sunday? Very simply, if Monaghan had an expert free taker and really believed in themselves, we would be gone. We have spoken here in this column of experience and the Kerry subs bench. Well, last Sunday it was never more evident that these two ingredients pulled us through." So there's just that bit of experience. And the bench you called out, even in the 7 final, with Mike Frank and a couple of other lads, loads of experience. And it seems like that's what pulled them through against Monaghan. I can only vaguely remember that game. But as you say, it wasn't the Monaghan team that would go on to be a fair powerhouse. They were still, a very capable outfit. But Kerry just scraped over the line. I think it was a Tomás O'Shea hand pass over the bar at the end to give them the win. So there was a fair bit of turbulence on their route.
which of course happened again in '09 when, again, probably that experience got them through. Then the semi-final, I remember the semi-final, they beat Dublin 115 to 16 points, so just by two. I remember because this was probably Bernard Brogan finally sort of cementing his position after a couple of years of, I think he'd done cruciates and all that, and he finally worked his way into the team. And if I remember correctly, he was playing wing forward, gave an exhibition, but they possibly took him off because they felt he ran out of steam. Because even though I can't remember all the ins and outs of the game, this was still the unproven Dublin at this stage, and my memory was, why are you taking him off? So I thought he was very good. And then in the final again, oh, actually Darragh O'Shea was taken. He was taken off after 20 minutes and brought on with 10 minutes to go. I think he'd been suffering with injury in that game. But then you jump on to the final. Cork, who of course were always very close with Kerry and Munster, they decided to put Graham Canty back on Gooch. And, Canty was brilliant at the time, but he ended up getting 1-5 scored off him, so kind of went spectacularly wrong. And that's one of the things we'll kind of look at here. Gooch played in both 2007 and 2015. Very, very different proposition between the two in terms of like the state or the level he was performing at in both eras.
Asher, he was probably in his pomp around '07. Like you go back to it, and Gooch was even playing in '02 against Armagh. Like so, he'd been on the scene 5 or 6 years and was well seasoned at this stage. Was nearly unstoppable in his best form. But like in 15, Philly McMahon, like we never really seen Gooch probably outside 40 to 45. I'd say with Kerry. I wouldn't say actually. I'd like to know how many times he was outside the 45 up until the latter stages of his career when he came out centre forward. And Philly seen that happening. Would it just be interesting the Gooch from '07, how he would fit in the modern game now? Like the game has changed an awful lot. A lad that's just a forward, you often hear managers talking now, like that's not just your role. Nobody that used to be the case even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, that your sole job was to score. You don't hear lads saying that anymore. You have to be able to do the physical shift. You have to be tracking back. You have to end up in your own 21 at times. And it'd be interesting to hear what you think. Like, would Gooch survive now in the current era if that was a major part of his brief and it wasn't just shooting the lights out?
Yeah, you wonder that would he have built himself up and become the sort of physical animal that so many of the players are now? Could he with the right S&C, applied to him 18 years ago, would he have become someone who looked like maybe it's a bad example, but Conor Callan, someone who's so filled out, and there's very few that can do that. But I'd say he probably would have gotten more filled out, would have had many more years of kind of being able to do those laps up and down the field. I think even Paul Gainey has gotten better in the last couple of years, and we saw how good he was against Dublin in the finals last year. But actually, if we to jump forward to 2015, and I'll just bring up the teams onto the screen here, and we might talk a little bit more about Gooch, is that that Dublin team, very, very strong, obviously, and they'd come back from losing in 2014 to come on and win this one, and it was a dirty dog of a day, 12 points to 9. But you see that Gooch was held scoreless that day and outscored by Philly McMahon. Yet Paul Gainey, who'd scored 2, and James O'Donoghue, who had scored 3 points, were taken off with 20 and 10 minutes to go, respectively. So, I mean, when we were talking off air, we were kind of like, is there an element of, differently to Cork in 2007, because they were fading against Kerry at Croke Park, it just seemed to be routinely almost. But Kerry in 2015, as the All-Ireland champions, there was an element of self-destruct in how they took off the two forwards that were actually competing versus the guy who was actually struggling.
Yeah, I remember thinking about it at the time. I was actually working in the independent office that day. I was in there that Sunday because it'd be a mad busy Sunday. And O'Donoghue had kicked 3 points and was outstanding. Outstanding the same day in really tough conditions. He kicked a couple of points from, that sort of 35-metre arc in horrible conditions. And it was really weird. He was reigning footballer of the year. Paul Gainey was an all-star, I think, in 14 as well. You had two lads who were bringing fair form in. Gooch obviously didn't play in 14. And it's almost like he was left on in 15 because of his reputation, even though he was struggling all day. Like, if he'd been left on because of his, because of his reputation, he gets a score at the end, and he was going well at the time, that's one thing. But he was been put on the back foot by Philly McMahon all day, who, as you said off air, Mark O'Shea was kind of one of the cornerbacks that started this kind of bombing forward. But Philly took it to another level. Like in the 15 semi-final against Mayo that we'll sure we get into, he scored 1-2 off Aidan O'Shea. And they were bombarding high ball in around the edge of the square sometimes, and he was winning high ball, and he was even getting forward to score 1-2. And it's just that 15 final was just very, very strange. Dublin came into it obviously having got that kind of culture shock of being beaten in the 14 semi-final by Donegal. They had no problem by winning at any means necessary in 15. They didn't care how it looked aesthetically. The way it turned out was that was the lowest scoring final since going back all the way since 1990. It was real turgid stuff. Dublin really didn't care, but it was funny to see them go after one of Kerry's biggest weapons, one of their best players of all time, and they went at him. And it was unusual to see Kerry stick with him in the last few minutes when other lads were going better, i.e. Geaney and Donoghue, but they left Gooch on, and it was to their detriment, to be fair.
Yeah, because I'm not sure that he ever fully got back up to the level that he'd had before the cruciate, which he suffered, of course, playing against Castlebar for Dr. Crokes at the start of 2014. I mean, there was one big performance against Kildare. I think he went to town, but Kildare were pathetic that day, and I think it was possibly in that 2015 championship, Kerry scored something like 7 goals on him. I remember watching it, pulling my hair out, thinking, what is going on here? But 2007 Gooch was definitely a far more elusive player, was always going to get a few scores for you. I mean, there was the question marks about, against the very, very best teams, Tyrone and whatever, and there are definitely a couple of examples you can point to where he did play a little bit better. But not only that, what would he have been like, having Declan O'Sullivan at his absolute pomp, loading the bullets for him, Paul Galvin in his absolute pomp. So I think it was probably a Kerry team that was, I don't know, it definitely didn't have the same amount of star quality around him to kind of tee him up. But I generally don't kind of give players those excuses. If they don't perform, they don't perform, because the whole game plan is based around getting the ball to him. And if he's not getting himself free or in position, I think the buck stops with them anyway. But if we're to look at a couple of other matchups between the 07 Kerry and 2015 Dublin, I like to see, Rory O'Carroll did end up marking Kieran Donaghy when he came on. But that, again, is a very different Donaghy. We're talking 9 years on from when he was Footballer of the Year, and 8 years on from the guy who scored 2 goals in the 2007 final. So surely there is an element that Donaghy might have done a little bit more damage.
Definitely, without a doubt, yeah. He was a different player. In fairness, he was after kind of resurrecting his career again in 14. Like, he only came off the bench for the last 5 minutes of the drawing game against Mayo, ended up starring in the replay. The little pun there, ended up starring in the replay, and then ended up getting an all-star after scoring, the crucial goal in the All-Ireland final. But he was on the wane. He was probably, you could probably say he was on the wane in inverted commas for a couple of years, but still had a part to play. And just on the Gooch thing as well, maybe, the reason, Geaney or O'Donoghue were taken off is because Gooch had that relationship with Donaghy from down through the years, and they thought that relationship might still be able to click when Donaghy came onto the field, but it didn't. And just even like Paul Galvin, that was kind of his last hurrah as well. He came on, he played very little football that year as well, came on and played 15 minutes at the end of that game, which was strange given the amount of time that he played that season as well. You're talking about self-sabotage. I think there were some really strange decisions made that day.
And actually, if you were talking about a good relationship built up the year before, James O'Donoghue and Kieran Donaghy did so well together. Remember that goal that James O'Donoghue got after the catch from Donaghy against Mayo at Croke Park in the drawing game? Yeah, it was like a couple of very strange decisions from Eamon Fitzmaurice. And of course, then the following year, he brings in Mark O'Shea for Paul Geaney later on in the game as well. So there's a couple of unusual ones in there, or was it even the year after again? But anyway, I think you kind of get the point. Another matchup, Darragh O'Shea circa 2007 against Brian Fenta circa 2015 as a 22-year-old, scored a point after something like 15 seconds of that All-Ireland final. That'd be fairly tantalising.
Oh, that'd be class, yeah. Like, Fenton ended up man of the match and ended up getting an all-star on the back of that year, but on the back of the final performance. And he was in or around, I'm not sure if he was on him all day, but he definitely marked him at different stages. David Moran was favourite to be Footballer of the Year before the All-Ireland final. and ended up not getting an All-Star on the back of how good Fenton played in that final. You know, it's funny though. Fenton and O'Shea were two different. Darrell O'Shea was the old-style midfielder. He wasn't bombing up and down the pitch. His primary duty was to win primary possession, and he invariably did. Probably the best fielder of a ball I've ever seen. It was amazing to see him in the flesh. But Fenton is a great fielder, but Fenton was a box-to-box and could kick 1-2 or kick 3 or 4 points. So it would have been a clash of styles. To see, it's obviously fantasy, but to see the two of them clashing, if Fenton had 3 or 4 years under his belt, and coming up against a Darrell O'Shea around 07 would have been, it'd be fair interesting. It's two completely different styles of midfielder.
Yeah, two lads who won't back down either. Another one I'd love to see is Declan O'Sullivan in his pomp around 07. He was back-to-back, like... There obviously aren't too many lads who've lifted the All-Ireland 2 years in a row now. Stephen Cluxton, of course, has done it 5 years in a row in 6 and 7, so he's obviously got the bragging rights there. But Declan O'Sullivan against Keane O'Sullivan.
Two Kerry men.
Yeah, both of his parents are from Kerry. His father's from Kilgarvan, like the Healy Rays, and his mother's from Ballyhar or something like that, I think is how it's pronounced. But that was always the criticism of Keane O'Sullivan. Can he mark his man? So that'd be a nice one because you couldn't leave Declan O'Sullivan, especially back in that era.
Declan O'Sullivan, around then, he'd pick up the ball. It's kind of like maybe a slightly watered down version of what Shane Walsh is doing now. He'd just get on the ball and he'd just start this mazy run from off out the field. It was really hard to dispossess. And yeah, as you say, he would have put Keane O'Sullivan on the back foot, big time on the back foot. Would have been a very, very interesting duel. The one thing we would have always said about like Keane O'Sullivan was brilliant sitting back in that pocket and playing a sweeper as he did. And he was brilliant in other positions. He played midfield, cornerback, wingback, centre back. But to see a fella like that forcing him onto the back foot, you'd force O'Sullivan out to mark, which would maybe draw space for other lads inside as well. Would have been, that would have been very interesting duel. As I said, the two Sullivans.
Absolutely. And then, so like, we're going to have to decide this one. The reason that I'm starting to lean towards Kerry is not because of the path they had to the final. I mean, they didn't beat a whole lot on the way to it. I mean, Dublin weren't a superpower in 2007. Monaghan weren't. They were used to beating Cork. Waterford obviously didn't present any opposition at the time. But the flip side then, well, they won it comprehensively, so you have to give Kerry that. I think the last 15 minutes of the game was a non-event. Dublin winning in 2015. So they'd obviously lost the year before, so they needed to claim the title back, and they were going to do it by any means necessary. 12 points to 9, horrific weather, not a great game at all. And like, at the same time, and this wasn't a great Kerry team that won All-Ireland in 2014. That's probably as average a Kerry team as ever won All-Ireland. But they could have equalised at the end. Kieran Donaghy had won a ball. He fed it off to Killian Young, who was coming through one-on-one on goals. But I don't know, were his eyes bigger than his stomach, or he didn't know whether to kick it or eat it or what to do with the ball. He ended up spilling it on the ground, and then Alan Brogan goes up for his famous counter-attack point straight away after. Like, so you have, on one side you have a Kerry team that won comprehensively versus a Dublin team that kind of fell over the line, and even like they could have won by more. I remember Brian Fenton hitting the post and he could have put them 6 up with maybe 20 minutes to go. But this Dublin team kind of did fall across the line when they probably should have won more comprehensively.
I think when you look at some of the bizarre things that happened in Kerry and some of the bizarre decisions were made, Killian Young's goal chance for one, the bizarre maybe substitutions, lads that were brought on, lads that were brought off, which were surprising. Like Dublin won it, but Kerry fairly made it a nice bit easier for them with some of the kind of things that they did. I think like Kerry, fair enough, their path to the final mightn't have been unbelievably comprehensive, but it was a comprehensive final win when back-to-back was there to be won. And
what did you say the Dublin route was that year?
Dublin hammered Longford, hammered Kildare, hammered Westmeath, beat Armagh by 8, beat Mayo after a replay when they looked in trouble in the semi-final, but eventually got a draw, or Mayo drew it the first day. Mayo looked in control the second day, and Dublin ended up winning by 7. They got 3 goals nearly in as many minutes, and then they beat Kerry in an awful final. Like 15 is not a year that will be remembered by anyone for good football, and I think I would say Kerry played better football, particularly even in that final against Cork. There was better football played in that final, I would have said, than over the course of the 15 final.
And you had an interesting point. You made an interesting point before we recorded about Dean Rock, that he was brought off at half time in that game and hadn't played well. And I kind of was of this feeling at that point in his career that he's a lad who plays well when you don't necessarily need him to. Now, my opinion has totally changed since. But it wasn't until the replay, I'm pretty sure it was the replay in the 2016 All-Ireland against Mayo, that I said, oh wait, this guy does deliver on big days.
Yeah, Dean Rock was kind of like, no, but I've been too harsh. He was seen as the free taker back then. And if his frees were off or anything like that, he probably wasn't going to remain on the field. And he was whipped fairly early. He had a really good goal chance. Dennis Bastick was going through, very strange. He didn't take the shot himself. He had a chance to shoot himself, passed it into Rock, and Rock was the shot was saved by the keeper. But his career, like, it's funny how, like, it's very, very humble beginnings from what looked like a lad that was going to struggle to nail down a place to one of Dublin's most important players and one of their clutch players going down the stretch. But when it comes to a duel between the two of these, it will be Kerry 2007 marginally for me. Whether they'll be in the hunt for the last four or the last two is debatable, but I think they'd still be edging this battle in my view.
Yeah, I think I just about agree. But as I said, it goes out as a vote for our viewers, and we'll be back with another one of these soon.